The 8th of October, we go on with the work of the Media Center Ukraine. My name is Svetlana Cheporenko, and now we will have the presentation of the Common Media Project of Statements. We will get to know what it is about, what will it promote us for, and we'll get acquainted with one of its representatives and protagonists. Let me introduce the participants. Olha Kuryshko, permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in Crimea; Vitalii Sekretar, first deputy head of the Prosecutor's Office of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol; and Akhtem Seitablayev, director of the state enterprise Crimean House. Good day. Olha, I would ask you for the beginning to provide us the overall framework. What is the current situation in the occupied Crimea is about the crimes committed by the occupants against the Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians who are located on the territory of the temporarily occupied Crimea, and what we can do now to counter these crimes. Hello, everyone. In fact, what we can see, especially after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, is even more efforts of Russian Federation occupational administrations to counter the resistance and Ukrainian position from the residents of the temporarily occupied peninsula. And especially it has become more complicated because of the lack of access from the territory. We used to have administrative border between Kherson region and occupied Crimean peninsula. As of now, it is very hard to leave the occupied territory, and Russian Federation is using that. We are also having weekly monitoring of the situation at the temporarily occupied territory. We publish it at the official page, and honestly speaking, as one of the elements of countering is the common decision, the position of public organizations, the Prosecutor's Office and Representation Office to launch a media project, which is, in fact, has an objective to tell the people who would like to witness what the war crime is, because we, as the experts working with that, for 10 years, we definitely know which actions can be qualified like a war crime, but the person who can become a victim may not know that there has been certain violation against him or her, especially if we speak about such cases like illegal deprivation of property at the temporarily occupied territory, because Russian Federation has activated a lot after the beginning of the full-scale invasion in the issues of so-called nationalization of property or forced confiscation or seizure of property from citizens. So honestly speaking, we have created a certain matrix, a framework of the crimes about which we'd like to collect statements and evidence, and to increase the number of testaments and also statements, witnesses' statements about such crimes. We tell in the simple words which actions of occupational administrations can be qualified as crimes and what is needed for that. We also tell which documents can be collected by the people. For instance, sometimes people are afraid to show the documents issued by the occupational administrations, understanding that maybe they will not be perceived by the Ukrainian law enforcement system. But in fact, it is not true. These are the evidence which can be used against the criminals who are violating the rights of our citizens. So honestly speaking, we will have the presentation today of the first video about forced deportation. Here we're speaking about several types of this deportation, both through the forceful, the expulsion and also the movement of political prisoners, which is also the crime of deportation. Because as of now, we know about 220 political prisoners, the majority of whom are at the territory of Russian Federation illegally. So we have developed a certain algorithms how these people could apply, even if they are located on the temporarily occupied territory. The latest point, the last point I'd like to mention, all of the recommendations which we developed together were developed understanding the security risks, because Russian Federation is really monitoring the communication of between the people from the occupied territories and Ukrainian side. They can prosecute for that. So feeling the responsibility for the people who are victims of the occupation and who would like to state about that, we have developed a certain algorithm how to act and to get to the law enforcement system I mean the prosecutor's office, the national police, the security service, with different authorities who are considering and investigating these crimes. I'm grateful to our protagonist who agreed and supported our initiative and provided the video recording of the first reel. I think we will watch it in the end, and I do hope that today, this is the day of a lawyer. This is the day of the lawyer for the lawyers, but it's good that we launch such a legal project which is targeted to take to responsibility and liability today. Thank you, Olha. Vitalii, moving to you. Could you please tell about the main types of crimes registered at the temporarily occupied Crimea and which this project urges to testify about? Thank you for the question. We are in the Prosecutor's Office of Crimea since 2016, are fully focused on the investigation of war crimes in Crimea and qualified these actions as war crimes, not just criminal cases. And our experience dates back since then, when we were thinking how to launch this project. Undoubtedly, we were basing upon our own experience of documentation which used to be before. So to cover as many people as possible who could become victims of such crimes. So when we assessed these crimes and perpetrations, we could see that, for instance, according to the official statistical data, approximately 55,000 persons got the status of IDPs from Crimea. How many people did not get this status? Because, for instance, they did not want to legally register and go through this procedure. Approximately 28,000 of people just refused to have this status. They had their own reasons. Many people left to the territory of third countries. So when we were beginning the research of the ways how Russian Federation deports the civilians from the Crimea, we found out that approximately 12,000 of court rulings by these facts are taken by the occupational authorities. And we understood what's the volume, how big it is, and what's the big number of the people who potentially are the victims of such war crimes. So when we investigated these crimes, we saw a different tendency. When we found a specific person and started communicating with him or her, many of them did not even understand that they were the victims, because maybe people are perceiving the word war crime as a synonym to the war. And that is why it seems to them that the war crimes are only taking place when there is shelling and the combats, but it's not true. So any mode of occupation is already equalized to the mode of armed conflict. Any violation committed against civilians by the occupants, where this armed conflict helped the occupier to commit the crime, is already a war crime. So that is why we had such an idea to talk, as it was just mentioned by Olha, directly in simple words, and to explain to people with simple words that you may be the victim of the war crime. If you are the victim, what you can do, how you can protect your rights. And we understood that, again, we as lawyers can sometimes not speak with simple words. In red tape, maybe, we can be lost. So we thank Akhtem, who, in fact, responded, because he, as a representative of Crimean Tatar people, the person who is directly from Crimea himself, who is known and heard by many people from the peninsula and the people who came here, he, by his own example, can show that in this unity of the law enforcement system and unity of lawyers and the voices of the people who were still not heard, we could achieve full success and restore this justice. One more crime which we are planning to consider, that is the full-scale destruction and also owning the property. Those are rather high indicators, but I will not talk about that now because it will be the topic of our next video in this project. the appropriation of property. And the third type of the crimes, the forced drafting and mobilization, because we understand how many people are the victims of such crimes. Investigating these crimes and taking military commissars to liability who are working in the Crimea, we understood that people are afraid of that. People think that the law enforcement system of Ukraine will punish them for being drafted and conscripted. But we'd like to explain again why it is wrong. It is not that. We have the common objective to punish the people who are torturing the civilians every day. And we are trying to reach their hearts and minds so that they could come to us and tell their story. And we would be able to use legal mechanisms to protect their rights. Vitalii, today we will be focused on the first video, which is about the crime of forced deportation. Which figures are now among the law enforcement authorities? How many people were forcefully deported from Crimea? When I started to talk, I mentioned certain figures. And we could not calculate specifically 12,000 of specific cases, but we need to process the data about the IDPs, what's with them. We're also focusing on the people who are beyond in the third countries. We are expanding the project, so we'd like to also involve our foreign diplomatic institutions so that the people who are living there could get this information as well and could also know which mechanisms and ways to get to us exist. So the number of people is incredibly enormous. The law enforcement system, as you understand, is not that big. So when we speak about 200,000 war crimes committed now after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, then the number of the crimes is a small number, but the number of victims is increasing times and times. Recently, I communicated with one journalist from the British outlet, and she asked how many criminal cases you have. And I told her, please understand, in one criminal case we have dozens of thousands of victims. The number of cases does not tell us anything. We should speak how many people we can protect, how many human fates can be treated, recovering and coming back to the justice during the criminal case. Thank you, Vitalii. Akhtem, you have become the protagonist of the first video. Soon we'll see it, and it will be about the crime of forced deportation. So it is not an accident that you became the protagonist of this video, because you have your personal story of forced deportation. Could you please share in a nutshell about this story? Well, first of all, I would like to thank you so much for this work in synergy with the Permanent Representation Office of the Republic of Crimea and the Prosecutor's Office of Crimea. It tells us that we are not indifferent, that the issue of Crimea, the occupation of Crimea, is always relevant. We need to remember that modern Russo-Ukrainian war started with the occupation of Crimea, that the first victims of this occupation appeared in Crimea. For me personally, it is the statement, the testament that if the human being is really human, because consciously saying to yourself to take part in this information diverse campaign, not to be indifferent, not to be silent, witnesses that you're not indifferent to the basic fundamental human values. And it's also supported by me being a Crimean Tatar, and I couldn't be present at the funerals of my parents because of the occupation. For any parents, visit to the grave of your parents is one of the also fundamental needs and values, to give respect to your parents. For more than 12 years, I never visited Crimea. Is it painful for me? Yes. Do I want as many people as possible to get justice, which was just mentioned by Vitalii and Olha? Yes, I'd like that, because it's also my personal need. When together with the team we created the Khaytarma movie in 2012 in Bakhchisarai, we couldn't even imagine that just in a year and a half, these events, which we were all confident are in distant past already, will repeat again. Maybe not in the scale how it was organized by Soviet authorities, but still really harsh and cruel, are the means how they intimidate, how they conduct as occupational authorities. They're really not different from what was done by the Soviets. This is the continuity and this kind of succession, if I may say, of the modern Russian Federation, of those tools and pressure conducted by Soviet Union then. For me personally, it is a direct similarity. What can we do ourselves? First of all, we shouldn't be silent. What can we do so that any conscious person or any person who, for instance, was never interested in Crimean issue, through this work and synergy could get to know about it and stop being afraid? Because again, I'm really supporting the point of Vitalii that in many cases, this lack of desire or ideas, thoughts, whether I should come and register or to get a consultation, whether I'm a victim or can I somehow influence or add my voice to the future indictment, which I am sure will take place against Russian Federation, is fear. Fear for yourself, fear for your relatives, fear of your lack of knowledge of those tools, legislative initiatives which already exist, and the legal way when the person shouldn't be afraid if he or she got something like a document from the occupational authorities, because it was a forced step. Moreover, let me tell you from my own behalf, for my relatives, for my closed persons who, because of these or those reasons, are staying and living at the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea, I even give them the advice to get the documents so that somehow they could freely move all over the territory of Crimea, at least to decrease one reason, to cut out one reason of getting to the detention center or anything, this risk. I know that those are numerous cases like this. If you are staying there, if you have the necessity to take care of your parents and so on, we understand that we need the individual approach to each of the cases. You still need, being a conscious person, you shouldn't get to danger. And maybe even the more important case is your voice, your statement, the documents which you saved, if they are, so that it could become in the future one more brick for the indictment. The question is whether to take part in that or not. I never faced it, because we have the honor to cooperate a lot with the Permanent Representation Office of the President, and this is always full of emotions, measure which again and again support that Crimea should stay in the information agenda of Ukraine and international arena. At each event abroad, either in the Parliamentary Assembly of Europe in Brussels or in the headquarters of NATO, we always emphasize we need to remember that the modern war started with the occupation of Crimea. It is important to be human. It is important to have democratic values. And this first video, I do hope for that, will be this necessary little brick for the awareness, for the decrease of fear of our co-citizens to get to certain law enforcement authorities. And emotionally, we should remind that Crimea is Ukraine. Thank you, Akhtem. Let us watch this video, and then we'll go on with our conversation. My name is Akhtem Seitablayev. I'm the Crimean Tatar. I know what is to lose your home. I know it is not always taking place under the sound of shells and projectiles. Sometimes it's fear, intimidation, the words in the court verdict which you don't even understand. After 2014, Russia restored the practice of massive deportation of Ukrainians and indigenous people from the Crimeas, the one which they used for multiple times in the past. Such actions are named deportation. More than 57,000 of Crimean residents had to flee to the continental part of Ukraine. More than 12,000 illegally deported by so-called courts. And how many people left abroad or did not even state anything about themselves. How many of them, in fact? Russia forces you to leave your own home because you have a wrong passport, you don't have the job permit, or the rules of your stay are violated. But the real reason is totally not documents. They just want so that the Crimea in any way would replace everything Ukrainian with Russian. If you were forced to leave, you should know it's not for you to blame. It's a crime. If you were intimidated or threatened, if you were forced to leave because of your fear of detention, you were deprived of a home or job, if you were deported because of so-called sham court, this is the war crime which should be punished, and we would like to help with that. But to bring those to justice, we need your story. Even if it took place long ago, even if you don't have all of the documents, what can help us to help you? The verdict of the occupational court, any documents which were issued to you before you left, pictures, videos, witnesses, even just your story. If you were forced to flee from Crimea, tell us about that. Leave your story at the website by this link or QR code. All of the documents and important restrictions by this QR code and the link are in the description under this video. Watch through them in advance to be safe. And it is important to bring those who are to blame for that to justice and to recover justice as it is. That is a very convincing statement as for me, Vitalii. And now I'd like to ask you why it is so important to collect all of these documents, the court rulings and verdicts, all of the possible confirmations of this forced deportation which took place for the International Criminal Court, for the international law and order. Why are these details weighing that much? Well, you know, it is important not only for the ICC, not only for the national court system, it's important also to find out truth. And you know, now if we conduct the comparison with deportation of 1944, not that many people used to know about these facts. Now the story is being known. People begin to speak about that. People begin to acknowledge the tragedy of the peoples who were deprived of their homes. Today, Russian Federation is doing the same with everything Ukrainian which is there. And in the video, Akhtem is telling about that. Because when we started the investigation of war crimes, we understood that the main objective of Russian Federation is, first of all, to change the demographic composition of the population. First, to occupy the territory, then to drive away and to expand everything Ukrainian. So every little evidence is the detail of the big puzzle of the bigger system. So when we get to the court, the national, or when we send the information notifications to the ICC, to the prosecutor's office, we create these puzzles together to convince the lawyers who will take decisions about whether these or those persons are to blame or not, whether it really took place or not, to convince them that that is really the crime, it took place, and there are the victims whose rights have to be recovered. So I don't know whether you used this QR code. It will lead you to our website of the Prosecutor's Office of Crimea. In the first chapter, in simple words, we are explaining what deportation is. We even left to mention what evacuation is, because maybe there could be people not only from Crimea there, and the ones who were evacuated without their consent, saying that that was evacuation. That's deportation as well. We tell why it is important, which evidence can be there. We tell how to save each evidence, if you have it, how it can be given, what it can mean in this or that case, in the simple words as it possible. There won't be that much work for the lawyers, but for the people who would like to understand the situation, we do hope that we posted it in simple words, and the outcome will be the people coming to us and the opportunity to protect their rights. Can people consider for the material reimbursement as a result of this statement? It's more for the political component of our state, not for the law enforcement. The law enforcements are taking place in the process to bring people to justice. If there was some material damage conducted, and we will be speaking about, for instance, the facts of forced deprivation or appropriation of property, there is a mechanism for that, like the arrest for the property, the confiscation and seizure as a special type of punishment, and reimbursement if we can see civil suits, and it will be getting to reimbursement. I know that our executive branch authorities are taking measures so that the affected in 2014 from the armed conflict could also be among the ones who could get different, I would say, advantages, including the reimbursement of damage. Thank you, Olha. This first video is the first one in the series which is planned. Could you tell more? Which topics will also be raised? Which crimes will be discussed? And who can become the protagonists of these videos? Thank you for the question. Before moving to the answer, I would also like to add to what was mentioned by Vitalii. We need to understand here that we are more speaking about the criminal justice. We are speaking about bringing to justice the ones who are guilty for the occupation crime and the violation of the rights of Ukrainian citizens. Speaking about compensation mechanisms, it is the historical moment of the launch of compensatory work of the Commission and the Register of Damage, which takes into consideration the events starting in 2022. But as of now, they don't fully take into consideration the events of 2014. And it is the task for us to communicate it with the partners and communicate with the people which types of violations can be stated as well. Here we're speaking more about bringing to justice and about communication with the Russian Federation, bringing them to justice at the highest level. And coming back to your question, we took the scale of the crimes according to our analysis. We will be raising the questions about forced passportization, what Akhtem mentioned, the large-scale ones, because this is the crime committed not only in Crimea but other temporarily occupied territories, and there can be different cases of forced passportization. In Crimea, they used some mechanisms, and other mechanisms were used in other areas. So we can see now how Russian Federation is manipulating the documents and the actions which they commit against the Ukrainian citizens at the temporarily occupied areas, because now we can see the beginning of the procedure of so-called deprivation of passport of Russian Federation and expulsion of citizens of Ukraine which were convicted before. We are speaking about political prisoners to the territory of other countries. Definitely it is a threat. And we will be also speaking about the illegal deprivation of seizure of property, what Vitalii mentioned. It will be the next video, because Russian Federation using the impossibility for people to go there and to re-register certain documents, or just to use the legacy rights if someone died, or to use their real estate. And there are people who are IDPs and left in 2014, but because of safety risks cannot come back to their property. During these times, they are it is considered to be estranged, so the citizens of Russian Federation are living there, so the person is losing the ownership. So we'd like to get into these cases to tell the people that even if they are located at the foreign countries, they can state about that, because these facts, in fact, are publicly and openly and blatantly, cynically communicated by administration. And this is what's very important, but it is not that frequently violated. Also in Ukraine, because you need statements and cases from specific people. If we speak about state property, we have cases, because the state is taking care and knows about its property, even if it is on the temporarily occupied territories. But speaking about private property, this is the question for the people to state and to apply about these cases to form criminal ones. We would like to speak about tortures, because especially now when there are exchanges of civilian hostages and prisoners of war, it is the known information that our people are being tortured. We have 3 death cases of political prisoners who died because of the lack of medical care in the detention centers. So we are speaking here about such cases of the use of tortures which led to the deaths of people. It could also be the use of violence when people were trying to get to the strikes or certain protests, and we need to look at other cases we can identify. Altogether, I think that we will plan approximately 4 or 5 videos about bigger topics. Deportation is the first one, illegal seizure and expropriation of property, forced passportization, and several more. And then we will communicate, as Vitalii said, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs so that this information could be spread through our foreign diplomatic institutions for the people who left to the territory of other countries, but definitely are victims, so that they could know that they have the right and opportunity to get to the law enforcement authorities of Ukraine. Is this media project foreseeing just the creation of videos, or will you have other media communication tools for awareness? We would like to expand this project. We are working to create it as a separate project with a separate platform. As of now, it is logical and appropriate that it is a part of the communication which is going from the Prosecutor's Office of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. This is the Prosecutor's Office which was one of the first to investigate war crimes and which has the experience of work with the temporarily occupied areas. And then we would like to combine and to search for additional partners. Maybe those would be representatives of foreign public organizations which would be able to help pro bono for the people to write certain statements. We are looking at different options how to expand, considering what's the bulk or the number of applications of people in these spheres. Thank you, Olha. Vitalii, I cannot help touching the security and safety issue for the people who are ready to testify. How can the state of Ukraine guarantee their security while testifying? How can we convince people that they shouldn't be afraid? Well, you shouldn't ever be afraid, and it is shown by our heroic people and the armed forces of Ukraine, thanks to whom we are all here today, and also considering that no one is afraid of the occupier and our fight of our people is ongoing. We shouldn't be afraid because, first of all, I can speak about the, in fact, the classified statement, because only the prosecutor and the investigator will have access to the materials. But if the person feels fear for his or her security, there is a separate law which foresees the protection of the persons, the participants of the criminal procedure, when they can change their private data, and different security measures are conducted depending on the situation. And also, when we get to the ICC, for instance, we would definitely ask for the consent of the person, whether we can share the information or not. And in any case, the data about the victims are staying just at ours. And the ICC, when we give the information there, we are always making them ciphered or just coded. The person is encrypted. The person gets the acronym and the number, but only the prosecutor knows who this person is and how we can get in touch with him or her. So in case of the feedback from ICC, for instance, or if the person gives a consent, we can also give this data. Any information is sensitive. It is not disseminated in any case. We do not inform who the victims are. So we can only speak about the number of victims. But again, we are trying, as you can see, the prosecutor's office is communicating some information, but tries to not to expose that many details. Thank you, Vitalii. Dear colleagues and journalists, do you have the questions to our guests? But you need the mic. I can see your hand. Second row, please. Good day. My name is Oksana from Interfax Ukraine. This is the question to Vitalii, I guess. Could you please tell what's the massive of applications? How many, in fact, applications or statements of the people who are in Crimea or left should be there? And from whom? The people who are in the third countries, more or less in safety, or also from those who are at the occupied areas? And one more clarification about the cooperation with the ICC. Could you please tell, as of now, what's the type of communication? How many statements have been sent already? And for the future, in the context of the creation of the tribunal on aggression, do you plan to involve these materials as well to this tribunal? As of now, it's ICPA. Thank you for the question. In any way, we are ready for any number of applications. That is why we went to so many people, so that these statements could come to us. We do understand that processing this massive of information will be done by 5 prosecutors in the specially authorized department. There was the certain reorganization process in the prosecutor's office, so this department will deal with these issues. Moreover, we are considering for, first of all, the people who have already been deported, who are expulsed from these territories. Now, those are the residents of Ukraine, but also there are people who can be located abroad. I think that the quicker communication will be with the ones who live here, because we are more accessible. The person will be interviewed, and the evidence which he or she owns will be collected quicker. But undoubtedly, international track is also in our focus of attention. The future vision for the development of these investigations of criminal cases is to pay attention not only to the citizens of Ukraine, because the protected person is any civilian who is not the citizen of the occupant country. This category can be by any citizen except Russian Federation. But if we read IHL, there are also certain exceptions. If the citizen in 2014 stayed in Ukraine because of some political persecution or something like that, and then Russian Federation came to Crimea and decided to deport him or her, then IHL considers this person to be a victim of war crimes as well. This is the vast question. As for ICC, with the International Criminal Court since 2016, we communicated 13 times. There were 13 information messages, which included information about different types of crime, including deportation, including forced deportation of our children, and also the properties and tortures and forced conscription and propaganda for the service in the army among the children, like Yunarmia, Young Army, and Crimean patriotic centers, so-called ones. And before the full-scale invasion, when no one knew what war crimes are, I think that a big success of the Prosecutor's Office of Crimea and public organizations and whoever supported us and who created these information messages with us in our final ruling about by the outcomes of the previous investigations, then the prosecutor made a conclusion that on the territory of Crimea, the war crimes and crimes against humanity are being committed. So we achieved our objective even before opening this case, which was opened after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Moreover, even if you look at the ruling, the number of the crimes committed in the Crimea, and which we managed to prove with our arguments, was bigger than the number of crimes about Donbass. And as it seems to me, it's an incredibly huge success, because proving the crimes committed under the occupation and crimes which are taking place during the combat are totally two different categories. We managed to do that. Since 2022, we started the official investigation by the support of many countries of the world which support Ukraine. They're done in the order. You know that there were amendments to the CPC which foresee certain issues. So if there is the interest in the ICC in these or those issues, they send us a request through the Office of the Prosecutor General. So this office sends us the request to process it, whatever is necessary among the information, and we give all the information which could satisfy the needs of ICC. About the crime of aggression, it's about a different crime. We are speaking about the war crimes and maybe crimes against humanity, but the crime of aggression is a different one. In the statute, which was signed, there is the mechanism of cooperation through the prosecutors, the Office of the Prosecutor General. When such communication takes place, we would be able to speak directly about that. Now it's just on paper. When the mechanism is working, we will be able to speak about that in more details. Thank you. Next question, please. Good day. My name is Yulia Kuzmenko, the Center of Human Rights, Zmina. Could you tell how do you interact with other regional prosecutors' offices? Maybe you have common notifications to the ICC, because also deportation is systematic and massive. And secondly, does your prosecutor office consider collaborationism of Ukrainian citizens, because there is a certain collision about the introduction of these provisions to the criminal code of Ukraine. According to IHL, as far as I know, the occupant country needs to have the same law enforcement system of local authorities which used to be before. We understand that Russia violates that, but Ukraine is considering its citizens as criminals. So, as Akhtem said, the person would like just to secure himself or herself living in his or her own village, but the person can be convicted for collaborationism in Ukraine. Thank you for the question. The first was about the regional prosecutors' offices. We are cooperating and interacting through the system of the Office of Prosecutor General. If there is this or that case about two separate administrative units in Ukraine, then we coordinate this issue. If the crime was started on the territory of Kherson region and was finalized on the territory of Crimea, we define, depending on the number of witnesses and the evidence which can be owned by the pretrial investigation authority, who will deal with that. We are coordinating with the Office of Prosecutor General, and they are providing specific cooperation between different units which are subordinate to them. So we did not write any notifications to the ICC with other prosecutors' offices. It was our initiative only. And before amendments to CPC in 2016, we did not have this mechanism at all. Then our head went to the Prosecutor General to get permit for such communication, which was given. And I would say we were the first ones as state authorities to communicate with ICC. But thanks God it all worked, and it is working now. The people who posed questions why you are doing that understand perfectly that what we used to do, because they can see the consequences of the armed aggression and the full-scale invasion. They feel it on their own skin. They know, they don't just know that some occupation is taking place in the south or east. As for collaborationism and war criminals, you know, besides having the criminal code, we have also criminal procedural code, CPC, and also unwritten rules existing in the prosecutor's office of Crimea. We understood that we'll have law enforcement authorities coming to us and saying, you know, some entrepreneur in Crimea is paying taxes by Russian legislation. Let's bring him to justice. We are sending such people back where they came from, because we understand specifically what occupation is. We were working with occupation for 8 years already, and we understand how people are living. On the other hand, Akhtem spoke about passports. We understand that people are getting passports forcefully, and to get medical care or some necessary social payments or just to save their property. It's a necessity, and in every case it is being analyzed. When we used to bring to justice people for treason, we did not just assess the fact of this transition. We also assessed the fact what they did, what they committed. So we have deeper approaches to bring people to justice. It's not just done for statistical indicators, because we understand perfectly that there will be the period of transitional justice when Ukraine will come back to this territory. Ukraine will have to live there, and I'm sure that the mechanisms will not be only of criminal responsibility or liability. Maybe there will be certain commissions on finding out the truth, maybe some lustration procedures, maybe amnesty ones, and so on. So we will, when we take such people to justice, we understand the substantiality of these evidence with the, also the future view, because we understand that we will come back to Crimea. Other questions, please? The first row now. Olha Matarikina, Ukrinform. I have a clarifying question. Did I understand correctly that the people who would like to testify need to get to the law enforcement authorities? Where should they go? Should they go to you as the prosecutor office of Crimea? Where should the person go who decided to give the statement? When you use this QR code, you will get to our website and you will see several chapters. So when you push the buttons, they will open. There is the question where to get to there. And if the person, it is hard for the person to write a letter on the paper, we have the e-form. So using this electronic form, the person will be able to provide the minimally necessary information. Besides that, in the text itself, when we describe the algorithms of getting to us, we said that if you trust the lawyer, the public organization, the human rights one, you will get to them, and they will know that they need to get to us. There can be different ways to get to us, from paperback ones to the e-form. So please, can I also clarify, are there people who are already giving these statements? Yes, there are people who have already testified. I will not tell you the number. I was not calculating them. But there cannot be rulings without people's statements. If you follow our activity, you will see that this is the most spread category of war crimes which are used to bring to justice in Crimea. Identifying our victims, we interview them. Some of the victims are now the soldiers of the armed forces, so sometimes we have to ask commanders for people to come to us and give us a statement. We are now using novelties of the CPC when we are not only interviewing, but we are also recording videos so that we could use them without the person in the court. The judges agree with us. In some cases, when the person can come personally, can arrive personally, he or she gives the statement in our office. The rulings are the outcome. So the first verdicts which appeared on deportation are done by these materials. Are there any other questions left? Then I would like to thank our guests. Let me remind you that we had the presentation of the Common Media Project of witness, and please share the QR code which you saw with the people who can share such statements. And the team of Media Center Ukraine is already working on the schedule of following events. Please follow our announcements, and thank you for staying with us.